Hi, we're from Bartholomew County Public Library. I'm Annette.
And I'm Kate. We're standing here in the Commons at the main entrance, and this room is called the Miller-Tangeman Lobby. So the Commons was originally built in 1973, and it was dedicated in 1974. It was designed by an architect named Caesar Pelli, and the reason why the building was built is they wanted to revitalize downtown shopping. So they tore down the rectangle that is Washington, Brown Street, 3rd Street, and 4th Street. So they tore down everything within there and sold it to developers. It was bought by Irwin Management Company, and they hired Caesar Pelli to design it. Caesar Pelli wanted to create a community space that was the Commons, and then also a shopping mall, which was Courthouse Center. So J. Irwin Miller, his wife Xenia Miller, and his sister Clementine Tangeman decided that they would donate the cost of the Commons, and then the development company paid for the mall. When the Commons and the Courthouse Center opened, a huge part of their marketing campaign was how wonderful it would feel to shop in the air conditioning. In a second redevelopment plan, it was decided that Courthouse Center would be torn down and the Commons would be rebuilt. It was redesigned by Kedar Kim, which is a Boston design firm, and they left the steel structure of the building and chaos and built the new Commons around it. And before it was built down, there was one final gala held here on New Year's Eve in 2007.
When they were deciding about the name for the new mall in 1973, they actually put a little coupon in the paper where individuals could send in and come up with a name for the mall. But some of the names that came in I thought were kind of fun and wanted to share with you. Probably the most common name for the mall was Washington Square. There were several people that suggested Washington Square as the name. And the Courthouse Mall, which we know it ended up being called Courthouse Center. And some of the other names here, some people thought it should be called the Miller Mall because of the Miller family, and they were so involved in it. And a throwback to John Tipton, there were a few who thought it should be called Tipton Square.
We are standing in front of the sculpture Chaos 1, which is one of the best known parts of the Commons. It was designed by sculptor Gene Tingley, and it was commissioned by J. Irwin Miller, Xenia Miller, and J. Irwin's sister Clementine Tangeman. Tingley as a sculptor was suggested by the architect Caesar Pelli. And the sculpture, he didn't build it here. It was actually built in the old pump house, which now is Upland Brewery. And then they moved it from there to here when it was ready to be installed. He had it put in a moat to protect the sculpture from the people and the people from the sculpture. The sculpture weighs almost 7 tons. And it cost $130,000 to build in 1973, which in 2020 is about $786,038.12. Tingley said about the sculpture that now and then it will get mad, and when it gets mad, it will take off in a burst of speed full of surprises, which is a great description of what happens when all the parts start moving. Yes. So when the Commons was finished, the building was dedicated in 1974 at the May Fair, which was kind of like a Renaissance fair. They had artists in residence, musical performances from East High School and North High School, and there was a community picnic held in Millrace Park called Feast of the Fork. And so that was when the Commons was officially dedicated. And the Commons area was used as a public space, and there were tons of festivals. There was more than one May Fair held here. There were concerts, recitals, tournaments, like ping pong tournaments that were held here. There's also a very popular playground that was remodeled in 2013 and called the James A. Henderson Playground. The Parks and Rec Department estimates that it received 100,000 visitors annually.
When the Commons part of the mall opened in 1974, well, it was dedicated in 1974, there was a store called A Common Place, which was actually upstairs. You'd get off the escalator, and the Common Place was just directly to the left after you got upstairs. And they sold fine arts and crafts, and they sold on a commission basis that consisted of glass and wood display cases and wall exhibits. Their wares included various media, stitchery, macrame, jewelry, batik, and ceramics, woodcraft, sculpture. A lot of it was local artisans, or fairly local. Said 35 of them worked within a 150-mile radius of Columbus, so they were fairly local to us. They actually received about 70% of the income from what they sold. The Service League received 10%, and then the Commons itself received 20%, and that's how they funded the programs that were here to help make free programs and displays for people who came to the civic part of the mall. One of the other stores that was in this area, there were kiosks. There were 2 of them. They were little round open areas, and the first store in one of those kiosks was called The Artisan. It was owned and operated by Philip Miller, who was an art teacher at Columbus East High School. And Hiru Milkani, that person was a marketing manager with Cummins Engine Company. So the 2 of them opened the store called The Artisan June 1st, 1974. They sold oriental carpets, wood carvings, batik prints, ceramics, tapestries, jewelry, jade, silks, and ivory from East Asia and South America. And they also did some locally handmade items. Gene Brierly had Gene's Bakery here in town, not here in the Commons, but he wanted to open up a cafeteria. He had one in Eastbrook Plaza, and he wanted a second one down in the downtown area. When they were trying to get stores for the mall, he thought this would be a great place for his second cafeteria downtown. And so it was planned really from the start, but it didn't open. It didn't open until late April or early May of 1974. It would seat approximately 220 people, and it was a great addition, I think, to the mall. People, I remember the stage was right below it, and people would sit up and be able to look over and see whatever programs were going on in the mall. So he also had the Apple Tree Snack Bar, which was over by the playground, and that actually didn't open. It was one of the last stores to open, not the last one, but one of the last. It didn't open until June 26th of 1974, and it was more of a coffee shop, soups and sandwiches, and I know people would sit at the apple tree and they'd watch their kids play, and because it was right there by by the playground. But it was also owned by Gene Brierly, who owned Gene's Cafeteria. The other kiosk store, that was the last that I could find. That was the last store that opened in the mall, the last space that was available. And it was opened by Barnaby's Flower Shop. It opened August 15th, 1974. It was owned by Richard and Jean Barnaby. And the interesting thing when I went back to research it was that they were believed to be the second oldest family business in Columbus. The first one was the Republic newspaper, which opened in 1872. But Barnaby's had been a family-owned business since 1889. And so they had always had a store downtown, I guess, or in town. and decided to open in the second kiosk here in the mall. So those are the stores that were down in this area of the mall. Okay, we are in front of what used to be the old Sears building here in Columbus. There's kind of an interesting little story about this building, I think, because Sears, it was obviously a catalog company, but they started with retail stores, and Columbus got its first Sears retail store in September of 1929. And in the paper I found that, that's all that was reported when our more recent Sears store closed. But what I found when I was researching is that the store that opened in 1929 turned around and closed a year later in December of 1930. And the reason that the paper reported for the closing was, and I'm quoting the paper, it said, "We do not feel that the business conditions justify continuance of a branch store of the type in the Columbus area. We feel that it would be more profitable to make any further expansion into more populous territory." So evidently there weren't enough people here at that time that they thought it wouldn't be as prosperous as they were hoping. So it opened in September of 1929 and it closed in December of 1930. And then later on, a catalog office opened up in the 40s, but it wasn't until 1953 that a new retail store opened, and it was in this same building. So it was the same building that was used in 1929. But then in 1973, when the mall was being built, Sears decided to move from this area of downtown into the mall. 1970s, malls were a big thing, and everybody, every town seemed to want one. So they decided to build the mall downtown, and Sears was going to be the anchor store. So they moved to this space in 1973 in March, and they opened on March 28th of 1973 here in the Courthouse Center. They were the first store to open. They stayed here pretty much until Sears closed down the store in the mall, which was closed March 9th of 2014. So, Sears had a big presence in Columbus for a long, long time. Sears department store opened March 28th, 1973, and it was the first store that opened in the Courthouse Center Mall. And it was right here on this end. And most of the rest of the stores, though, they didn't actually have the grand opening of the Courthouse Center Mall until October 24th of 1973. So Sears was open several months before the grand opening. So on the 24th of October, the stores that opened in the Courthouse Center Mall were Viewpoint. There was a store called Thoroughfare. It opened on the 24th. It was a young men's and women's store. They were a division of Sablowski's, which was a family-owned corporation. They owned a department store in Indianapolis for 73 years. There were 2 other Thoroughfares in Indianapolis shopping centers. I remember that's where we always went to buy our jeans. So it was a very popular store with young people especially. The next one was Osco Drugstore. Osco had 190 stores in 17 states. There were 15 Osco drugstores in Indiana. There were 3 in Indianapolis, 1 in Bloomington. They were founded in 1937. And actually, I think the Osco that was here in the mall, we actually had 2 Osco drugstores. One was across town in Clover Center, and then the other one was here in the mall. And I think the one here in the mall didn't close until about the time the mall closed. I could be wrong on that, but I know it was open a good long time. Then there was Kinney Shoes, which was one of my personal favorite places to shop. I liked their shoes. They were called the world's oldest and largest family shoe chain. Their company was located in New York. They were part of Woolworth Company. There were over 1,000 shops in the world, with 22 shops in Indiana. The company owned and operated 13 shoe factories. They carried footwear, hosiery, handbags, and shoe polish, and they were started in Waverly, New York in 1894. So Kinney Shoes was around a long time, and I told Kate I thought I still had a pair of them, but I must have gotten rid of them finally, because I carried these shoes for a long time. The other store that opened on the 24th of October was Bressler's 33 Flavors. That was the ice cream store. And if you've been around Columbus for a long time, I'm sure that you've been to Bressler's. I think everybody who came into the mall has been there when they were open, and they did not disappoint. They were owned and operated locally by William and Gloria Hines, but their plant was located in Chicago, and they had been there for over 40 years. The store featured ice cream in multiple flavors and cones in unique flavors, with a complete fountain service and made-to-order ice cream department for creating molds and cakes and other party goods. So we loved everybody. I've never heard anybody say anything bad about Wrestlers, because I think just about everybody loves ice cream.
We're standing in front of the current location of Viewpoint Books, and we're going to go in and talk with some employees who worked there when Viewpoint Books was in the mall, and who still currently work there.
So I'm Polly Verbanek. I've been associated with the Viewpoint Bookstore for, I'm doing the math, I think it's been 27 years. Some of those years loosely. My piece of the bookstore pie has been predominantly being the story lady here, which has been reading to children all through time. So I'm ancient in that regard. And then this is my friend Celia.
I'm Celia Watts, and I have worked for Viewpoint consistently for 22 years. It was just a part-time job at first, and now it is my only job.
And I can tell you why it's your only job. It's because it's a fantastic place to work. It's also been a real staple in the community.
Absolutely.
40-some years
Yeah.
now.
Uh-huh. Indiana's second oldest bookstore, as a matter of fact.
Second oldest independent bookstore. We will be 50 years old in 2023.
Yes, so expect a big celebration then.
Yep, so save the date.
Yes.
All right. We started as a store in Bloomington.
Mm-hmm.
You longtime folk in the community will remember Susan and Terry Whitaker. Susan's father started the business. There was a gift store in Bloomington, and then ultimately the bookstore in Columbus that was housed in the Commons Mall.
Yes, the Commons Mall. And I do miss the Commons Mall. I mean, I love this, having our storefront here so that we have the windows and we can see out and we're on the walking path. But I do miss things about the mall. I miss chaos. I miss the decorations at Christmas time.
Sure.
I miss all the different festivals and celebrations they would have going in down there. I miss the playground and the kids coming in to calm down in our store. And I miss the ice cream shop right next door.
Yeah.
So
It was a day out.
Mhm.
What would happen certainly is that parents would plan the day around, let's go down and look at chaos. So we'd be sitting in there and listening to the sculpture go brrr, clunk,
Yeah.
clunk, clunk. There used to be the toy store in there,
Uh-huh.
Thinker Toys.
Uh-huh.
It was short-lived, but it was also a venture from the Whitakers. And so that would be part of the tour, in addition to the bookstore. And then, of course, the Kids Commons Museum also came in. And then you had ice cream, whereas the Harricos across the street. So
Yeah.
it was pretty much an all-day sucker, for families.
Yeah.
What I remember is people running up and down the ramp.
Yes.
Remember the ramp?
The ramp.
That was huge, because then, if you really wanted to wear out your youngster, you look at chaos from up and you look at chaos from down, and in the interim, you just ran them up and down the ramp.
Yeah.
So there was a lot of that happening.
Yeah. And I remember the escalator.
The escalator.
And that would lead up. At one time, it led up to a buffeteria that was upstairs that was really good, and that was owned by the Carsons.
Now that's before my time, so
Okay.
before we were in Columbus, so I don't know that. But I remember the movie theaters being
Yeah,
upstairs.
and I worked at that movie theater too. And I also worked at Frank's White Glove Photo, which was also in the mall that developed pictures, and then finally ended up at Viewpoint. So
My fondest memory, and it's going to be yours too, are the Harry Potter parties.
oh yeah,
Because the bookstore was still in the Commons Mall when Harry Potter, the children's books series, hit the street. And on at least 2 occasions, I know we had a massive blowout party.
we did.
But
We
the,
did.
The biggest one was in anticipation of the last book in the
Right,
series.
right.
And it encompassed the whole mall.
And all the stores were involved. I mean, and the mall was big enough. They even drove the car into the mall. The
The flying,
flying
car.
car was there. There's someone in town that has the exact same model of that flying car that's in Harry Potter.
And of course, Chuck Baker, who recently passed away,
Right.
he was making
Yes.
the wands, and
Yes.
we had fortune tellers, and everyone was in costume,
Yes.
including the kids.
Yeah.
It was a good time to be in the
And
book
one of the
business.
storefronts I remember were empty, so we took advantage of that space, and they had a Quidditch field in one of the empty spots, and that was ran by a former employee that has passed away since, Melinda Sharp. She was the one that was in charge
Melinda
of the Quidditch
Sharp.
that night.
Oh.
Yeah.
Yeah, we would be remiss without giving a shout out to a deceased employee, Melinda Sharp. She did just an awful lot of the legwork, behind the scenes work for the Viewpoint. She was frontline too, but she was particularly good at the nitsy stuff of getting programming done. So
Yeah.
I forgot about her.
And then we also had Karen Brown, who's since passed, and she was just a steady, loyal employee. She also loved the bookstore as well. And then, of course, Susan Whitaker, who we all know and love, that brought the bookstore to this town and was a lover of literacy and books. And I don't think Viewpoint would be what it is today if it were not for her and Terry.
Remember the benches?
Yes,
We still have the
yes.
benches someplace,
Yes.
but often children will remember the colorfully painted benches by Kathy Burris, right?
Yes.
And I think Kathy Burris also did the painting that's in the city building of the bum. Who's the bum that the swimming felt the character in town. So I can't remember the title of the painting, but it references a character that would take kids swimming down at the river. So she also did the artwork on the benches, and they were sort of a staple at the bookstore for a long period of time, and we still use them. In our current COVID structure, we don't have space for them, but we revere the benches.
They're probably down here somewhere. Somewhere.
And of course, you talk about the stained glass. I think you have stained glass at home, don't you?
I do have a piece of the stained glass at home, yeah.
They and you may know more of the story than I do about this.
It was made by some people out of North Vernon, and that's all they did was stained glass. And Terry and Susan commissioned them with their color scheme that we had in the former store to design pieces that would be highlighted in our window. They were all in the window. We had a beautiful window space at the Commons Mall that we actually
backlit.
Yeah,
wasn't it?
we actually had. Do we have one or two? I guess it was just one window, wasn't it?
One
Yeah.
big long one.
One big long window, but you had to like climb up stairs to get into it, and it was not an easy thing to do to get in and out of. This one is much easier to get in and out of here, I believe.
The other story you're going to have to talk about, because I wasn't involved with it, is when the store moved from the Commons Mall to our location on the corner here. You know, if you can imagine moving a bookstore, that's probably why I said I was busy that day. But I know you were involved with it.
I was
Celia.
involved in that, and it was very organized, and we borrowed library carts from the library, and we loaded up all the sections, and with help from tried and true customers through the years, we all met early in the morning. We loaded up those carts, and we made several trips down Washington Street pushing those carts until we had them all loaded up here, and then everybody took a section and loaded up that section, and we got it done in a day. Yeah.
That, you know, when you think about it, you know, you're sitting here talking, and I'm thinking, you know, that Commons location, you know, we think COVID, you know, is a challenge, but in the bookstore world, there were a lot of challenges right at that time.
There were.
Because it was the rise of Amazon, right? And I remember the days just before Amazon, so
Right.
we didn't really have to contend with that. We had the competitors come to town right at the same time. Walden, books you might remember in the Fair Oaks Mall came. Online shopping for sure, not just Amazon, but the nature ebooks, the Kindle. So there've always been a lot of headwinds in recent memory, anyway, in the bookstore business. But book people are book people, and our customers sustain us and do even in our current masked up form. So
right.
We love our Viewpoint customers quite a bit.
We do.
Yep.
Yes.
So we're standing at Jackson and 4th Street, and this would have been approximately the middle point of the Courthouse Center mall. This used to be open before the mall was built, and then when they cleared the 2 blocks that they called the Super Block, they closed off this part of Jackson Street, and it was all one big long building from Brown Street to Washington. It was all one long building that made up the mall and the Commons. Some of the other stores I wanted to mention to you that were original stores to the mall. The last one I mentioned was Bressler's Ice Cream, and they opened, all of those that I mentioned prior were opened on the 24th of October when the mall opened, but some stores didn't actually open until later. Paul Harris didn't open until October 31st of 1973. It was a women's store. They had ready-to-wear, sportswear, coordinates, accessories, and they had been in business 19 years prior to coming to the mall. We already had a store, a Paul Harris store, in Columbus Center, so this was the second Paul Harris store. There were 14 stores in Indianapolis and 48 altogether in Indiana, Illinois, Ohio, and Kentucky. And I thought it was interesting how it got its name, because it said that the chairman of the board for the company, his name was Earl Harris, and the president of the company was Gerald Paul. So they used the last names of the two men to make the name of the store Paul Harris. Another store was Hillman Jewelers. It was a family-owned chain of jewelry stores that opened November 13th of 1973. It was owned by the Felston Company. There were 3 stores in Terre Haute, stores in Vincennes, Greencastle, Crawfordsville, and then they had one also in Illinois. They were direct diamond importers, and they got their diamonds from Antwerp, Belgium, and Tel Aviv, Israel. They also sold watches, crystal, china, silverware, photographic equipment, and some electrical equipment. Another place that most of us who've been around a while knew and loved was the Courthouse Center cinemas. They opened November 21st, 1973. For their grand opening, there were two screens in the cinema, and so the movies that were shown, the first movie shown in the cinema was Walt Disney's Mary Poppins was one, and the other movie was called The New Land. It was a sequel to the movie The Immigrants, starred Max von Sydow and Liv Ullmann. Now, they were one of the first stores that was announced when the mall was created, but they didn't actually open until a little later, till November 1973. And then there was Vedder's Magnavox Home Entertainment Center that opened November 30th, 1973. Vedder's had been operating a business in Columbus since 1949, and so having a store in the mall was their second store. They would feature exclusively Magnavox televisions, stereos, consoles, stereo components, radios, tape decks, and record players. And I thought when I was looking this up, I thought I better mention what a console is, because they don't sell TVs like that anymore. But the console television had it looked more like a piece of furniture. It had the wood grain around it and looked more like a piece of furniture. Or even with a stereo, sometimes it was a piece of furniture and had your stereo equipment inside it in it, so it looked nice in your house. And then the separate stereo components thing, honestly, I still have mine. Were separate pieces, like your turntable and your tape deck and your CD player, and then you had these great big speakers, that you fit it all together to make your stereo. But they opened November 30th. Rhodes Men's Store, it opened March 22nd, 1974. Prior to Columbus, they had 3 stores in the Louisville area. They sold men's and young men's apparel. And the Columbus store was actually supposed to have a section for women's apparel too. And the gentleman that owned it, J. Clifton Rhodes, had been looking at Columbus for a store location since the 1960s. So this worked out well for him at the time, I hope. And then Stewart's opened March 22nd, 1974. They sold women's clothing in Mrs. and junior sizes. They had locations in the Greenwood Park Mall, Lafayette Square Mall, and the Castleton Square Mall. So, as you can see, malls were a big deal back then. Everybody needed to have a mall. The other place that was just about right, maybe in this area, or may have been down a little bit, but Irwin Union Bank opened a branch here in the mall. They opened April 1st of 1974, and the designer of the Commons, Caesar Pelli, he designed the Irwin Union Bank also. It was nearly a full-service bank. They didn't have any safe deposit boxes, though, and it said, I read that Irwin Union Bank, it was their 7th banking facility. And here in Columbus, or well, maybe not just here in Columbus, wherever they had banks, I guess, but Irwin Union Bank. And then there was a place called the Card and Gift Gallery that opened April 10th, 1974, featuring candles, gifts, party goods, greeting cards. They were owned by an Indianapolis partnership. They had stores at Southern Plaza and the Glendale Mall in Indianapolis. And they were opening a store in the Tippecanoe Mall in Lafayette. So those were all the stores that we had in the original stores. There were lots of stores that came and went from the Courthouse Center, and Kate's going to tell you about one of those.
One of the stores that moved into the mall in 1976 was Godfather's Pinball Emporium and Peanut Arcade in the Commons Mall. And I'm going to read a quick entry from the history of Bartholomew County that was published by the Historical Society. Pinball machines. In 1942, a county courtroom was turned into a miniature Las Vegas after Columbus Police Chief Clarence Everode rounded up all the pinball machines he could find. Chief Everode acted after federal authorities requested towns around Camp Atterbury to crack down on all forms of gambling in anticipation of the arrival of many troops. City officials argued that pinball machines were illegal under existing Indiana law. 3 of the machines, Landslide, Speed Demon, and Flagship, with flashing lights and sound effects, were carted into circuit court. As Judge George W. Long watched, William Tommy Tucker, a Columbus service station operator, was called up to play the machines. Donald P. Shin, city attorney, argued the machines were illegal, while Edward J. Morrison, attorney for the Columbus Amusement Company, contended they were games of skill. On February 2, 1942, Judge Long ruled that all of the machines were illegal, whether or not there was a payoff or other reward. That ruling stood until August 1976, when prosecutor Richard Donnelly said his office would do nothing to curtail the pinball machines in the new Godfather's Pinball Emporium and Peanut Arcade in the Commons Mall, unless there were formal complaints. We're standing outside of Santa's house at the Commons. Santa has always been a frequent visitor at the Commons and Courthouse Center Mall. He even visited the year that the Commons opened. The Commons was always a great place to do your holiday shopping.
We hope you have enjoyed this nostalgic look back at the Commons and Courthouse Center Mall. We've tried to touch on at least all of the original stores. We know that there were many more stores that came and went from the mall and from the Commons while it was open as a mall, and we couldn't possibly touch on all of those, but as we had to do the one with Kate's story about the arcade, I just want to say, let them play pinball. But anyway, that was a really popular hangout when I was a kid or when I was a teenager. So, but anyway, we just hope that by reminiscing about some of these stores, the stores that opened originally in the mall, that it might get you thinking about Christmas and about what Christmas was like back then in the 70s, and we hope you enjoyed our short little tour of the Commons and Courthouse Center. Thank you.